Can you all hear me? Mic check. Can anyone hear me?
How are you? Good to see you. Good to see you in the house.
Peace, sister. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
Okay. So if you look up to the top of the screen, you see that little small, like it says 2 out of 5, and then it says 4 next to it.
Yes.
Okay, that's how many attendees you currently have. So, when you feel like you have enough, you can get started.
Okay. Can they hear me now or?
Yes, they can hear you. And
Okay.
then if you ask if you can see the chat, can you see the chat to the far right?
Yes.
Okay, so they're talking to you now. They're saying we can hear you. They're giving you our kind of icon. Do you see
Okay.
it?
I don't see the icons. I see your chat, but I don't see their
Okay,
chat.
so click on the on the top where it says event my agenda. Then it says session
Let's see on the top.
on the top
Yes.
right.
Top right. Okay.
You see event my agenda and then session.
I don't see that.
Do you see like right up there on the top right? It has a little emblem, like that's you, like that's where you sign it. It's a bell next to it, then an envelope, then another
Yes.
bell. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
right under that, see the word session.
Yeah, I don't see. I see the envelope, the bill, then my initials.
And then do you
Uh,
see under that, you see of event, then my agenda, then
okay.
session.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
So click on
Okay. I see
session,
now. Got it.
and
All
and now you can see their responses to you
right. Okay.
later.
Okay. Now, when should I start?
Well, right now you have 4 people if you look up there, so you can start now, or you can see if you get a couple more. People have been running in and out of this room,
Okay.
so
I'll
maybe.
go ahead and start.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Hotep Habaragani, can you all hear me? I'm going to go ahead and somebody confirm that they can hear me right now. Okay, good. I'm going to go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to try to figure out how to share my screen, which might be an adventure. Let's see. I saw it here earlier. Okay, share screen. Chrome tab. Okay. Now I can't see you all while I'm sharing the screen, so I don't know what's happening. Let's see. Give me one sec. Okay, there we go. I think that's it. How do I navigate? Next slide. How do you move the slides? Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to move the slides. Let's see. Okay. Well, I think I'll just go to the slide where I see the slides, and I won't be able to see your comments, but I'll just go through the presentation, and we can do some Q&A afterwards. All right. So my talk is Killing Marx, or Why Dead Crackers Can't Solve African Problems. Excuse the typo. I'm Brother Shabazz. I'm independent scholar. My training is anthropology, and I've been an activist since actually in the Marine Corps. So I was in the Marine Corps from 1990 to 1994, and some brothers in there sort of raised my consciousness, really. There's a Muslim brother, Bilal Hashim, who put me up on my first Afrocentric book, which was Naim Akbar's Chains and Images of Psychological Slavery, and the Browder File, and a few other brothers. And then I was sent to Japan, and on a deployment there, and Bilal Hashim suggested I start a study group. And I did. I started a study group called the African American Historical Society Study Group. And I became really inspired by our discussions about Malcolm X and Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. And so that really put me on the road to Black consciousness, Black nationalism, Afrocentrism, and not an unusual path, right? There are many revolutionaries who worked out or first became aware of the contradictions when they joined the Marine Corps. My favorite being Geronimo Pratt, who was a prominent member of the LA chapter of the Black Panther Party. So that's in a nutshell who I am. I've also traveled quite a bit. I've been to Ghana many times. My first time as an undergraduate at UCLA in 1997, and I've been going back and forth to Ghana since that time. I've taken 2 study tours of Black students to Ghana and Benin, where the feature or the main point of that trip was to study the slave trade and something I forgot what the other theme was, but primarily the slave. Oh, we also we talked about the African religions. So we went to Ouida in Benin and studied a bit about voodoo there. So that's me in a nutshell. Let's go ahead and get started. Let me grab my notes here. So my paper is divided up into 4 or 3 sections actually. Black critics of Marxism. Section 2, Can Africans Think? And then the final section is Killing Marx. All right, so Black critics of Marxism. And there have been many. This is not an exhaustive list, but we're just going to talk about a few of them. I think the center one is interesting. I'll start with her. And she's Professor Smallwood has written a book called Saltwater Slavery, which I highly recommend. And as I was preparing for this talk, I reviewed one of her videos where she's talking about her work, and her basic critique or her basic concern in her research has been recently, how is it that Marx missed the revolutionary dimensions or magnitude of the slave trade, right? So in Marx's configuration, the so-called slave trade, the Ma'afa, is primitive capitalism. That is to say, it's a precursor to real capitalism. And so she's thinking through how Marx might have missed that. But she says something interesting in that talk. She says she's not so much really mad at Marx because Marx was trying to get the revolution jumped off. And so he was trying to inspire the workers to rise up against the bourgeoisie, right? And so he had a specific interest at a specific time. And so she says her real beef or consternation is with Marxists, people who follow Marx, and why they've missed his point about the revolutionary dimensions of the transatlantic slave trade. So that's one critique. Another critique is Cedric Robinson, and so he has this idea of racial, well, his central idea or big idea in his book, Black Marxism, is racial capitalism. And so he talks about, and that idea is sort of how racial identity itself is a thing that's exploited by the bourgeoisie, right? So Marx focuses on class exploitation between the workers and the owners of the means of production, the factory owners, the merchants, etc., who control the means of production and their exploitation of the workers. And Marx says all that is primarily racial, or race has been the primary means by which people have been exploited, especially during slavery. And so that he calls that racial capitalism. He says, in fact, all capitalism is racial. When you think about the magnitude of especially how Black people have been exploited through the Ma'afa, the so-called slave trade. So that's Black Marxism. And then there's Obadele Cambone, who is, I don't know if he's called himself, I've never heard him say he was an Afrocentric thinker or he identifies as Afrocentric, but certainly his critique is Afrocentric. And basically, Obadele is a cultural nationalist. Again, I don't know if he's identified as that, but I would say that's what he is. And I myself am in that group. And what we say is that we're confident, basically, that Africans are fully capable of solving their own problems, and those solutions must emanate from our culture, right? So other prominent thinkers in this group, of course, is Molefi Asante, who is the founder of Afrocentricity, and there are many others. And alongside of that, Obadele has also raised a critique of from inside. So there's an internal debate within Afrocentric thought. He's critiqued, he's taken Ayi Kwarama to task. So, Ayi Kwarama is beloved within the Afrocentric community. 2,000 Seasons, Beautiful Ones Not Yet Born are his text that we refer to all the time. But Obadele takes him to task for his framing of Afrocentric or African culture, right? So Arma seems to have a bias towards egalitarian, non-hierarchical societies, which inherently suggests that anything else is exploitive. So namely, for example, the idea of kings and queens, of royalty. Armand says, in fact, in one of his books, I think it was 2000 Seasons, he says that royalty is a disease. And so Obadele takes issue with those sorts of critiques, and making the case that part of his critique is that Armand making these claims, he's for example misinterpreted the Metu Neter and cherry picked things to make the case for this egalitarian society that Obadele doesn't match the historical record, and we shouldn't just throw out that royalty, that kingship is an important part of African culture, right? And just because Marx has an idea about the way forward for political systems and economic systems, doesn't mean that Africans should be taking those ideas on board without critique. Royalty, kingship is an important part of our history and our cultures, and it should be useful to us going forward, right? We can't just toss that out because Marxists think, because a Marxist would say that it's inherently exploited because it's hierarchical. And so those are some other critiques. I would also add that we have to take Marxists to task for ignoring the role of spirituality, right? So for African people, in fact, the AAPRP, who are, I would say, influenced by Marxism, although they identify as Nkrumah's tourists, they cite, so AAPRP cites, for example, Kwame Nkrumah, who says that from an African perspective, we're fundamentally spiritual beings, right? But they don't make that the central of sort of their analysis of the way forward, or a critique of or an analysis of our situation, right? And from an African-centered perspective, the spiritual has to be foundational to what we do. Now, alongside of that, Obadele has also critiqued Nkrumah for his vision of Pan-Africanism, right? He says that Nkrumah made the mistake of trying to include all of Africa in the Pan-African scheme, when in fact North Africa is controlled by Arabs. And so we have to focus on quote unquote Black Africa. I don't know that Obadele used that term Black Africa, but North Africa is controlled by Arabs. If we bring them into our Pan-African sphere, they're going to undermine the project because they put their Arabness first. They put Islam first before Africa. And so we have to focus on Black Africa, quote unquote, Africa south of the Sahara, and the Black diaspora. And so they raised a sharp critique of Nkrumah on the idea of race consciousness, right? And so there's another sort of critique of Marxism that that racism is fundamental to our condition, and that our response to that exploitation is race consciousness, is unity around race, right? So another important critique of Marxism. All right, so let's move on to, let's see. Okay, the slides aren't working, so I'll just continue talking. Moving on to can Africans think? Now, what I mean by can Africans think is not that Africans haven't been thinking, but the ways in which we think and how African thought has been suppressed. And I recall, for example, a few years back, Molefi Asante had a blowout with someone in his department, Antonio, I've forgotten the last name, but he was a Marxist. And basically, Molefi pushed him out of his position in the Department of African American Studies there. And there was a huge controversy. The community rallied around Antonio. There was some mudslinging and name calling. And lots of folks got involved. But one thing that really stood out in that argument was the vitriol on the Antonio side towards Afrocentricity. And I recall one sister saying, making the point as to a sarcastic point that, well, if Afrocentricity is so important, why haven't you seen it, for example, in the prisons, right? You have Marxists in the prisons, you have Muslims in the prison, but you don't really see much of what you call cultural nationalism. And my response to that is that Afrocentrism has been, or African culture has been suppressed, even by Black radicals, right? So, for example, Fidel Castro, right? There was a communist revolution in Cuba where the workers supposedly took control of the means of production and took control of the government, right? And but Castro also banned Santeria or Regla de Ocha. So this is an African-inspired religion practiced in Cuba. Also in the Haitian Revolution, all the leaders who rose to power in Haiti, the first three leaders, Christophe, Dessalines, and also Toussaint, they all banned voodoo after the revolution, right? And this has been a consistent pattern, right? That African cultural practices, especially African religions, have been banned, and we all know that this was also banned on plantations, right? You could be killed for practicing, for being caught practicing an African religion. And so, for example, in many places like Cuba and Brazil, they had to mask their African cultural practices behind the Catholic saints. And this is a common pattern throughout the Americas, that anything that reeked of African spirituality was banned and strictly policed. Drumming, you could be killed for drumming. You could be killed for communicating in an African language. Likewise, in prisons in the United States, they're banning Kiswahili words because we use the Kiswahili to communicate, etc. So the problem has been historically, I would argue, that even within the Marxist tradition, African spirituality has been held to a great degree of suspicion. And so cultural nationalists are making the point that we have to challenge those efforts to suppress African-centered thought. And so when I say that, can Africans think, I'm talking about that huge gulf of time when Africans weren't really allowed to speak for themselves, right? And so from, say, the slave trade, that period of the slave trade, the Ma'afa, we don't really hear much about what Africans are thinking about their conditions, right? Marx is speaking for us, Adam Smith is speaking for us, and then we're sort of mimicking or being inspired by Marxist critiques of capitalism. We're not really going into our culture itself and thinking about critiques and models and analyses that might help us better understand these issues better than Marx, right? And so the outcome is that we have all this terminology that we sort of take for granted: capitalism, mode of production, materialism, Marxism, right? And so we've taken all those terms for granted, as opposed to trying to think creatively beyond them and figuring out what might there be in our culture as African people that might be a better analysis of our problems. And moreover, those solutions must be grounded in or rooted in African spirituality. For example, also alongside of the African spiritual part is, I would argue that Africans also are fundamentally, in terms of their humanness, is fundamentally shaped by their relatedness to other people, right? So, and we know that, for example, as Ubuntu, I am because we are. So our relatedness to other humans is fundamental to who we are as humans, as opposed to what Marx says, where our humanity is shaped by what we produce. And so it's that relatedness, and also our relation to the natural environment. Whereas Europeans have tried to control the natural environment and be godlike, Africans, through their spiritual systems, have tried to strike a balance with the spirit, with the natural world, with the earth, with the wind, with the air, with the water, with the sea, with the lakes, right? And so in that effort, we deify, or we assign human characteristics to those elements as we seek to understand and explain them in our relationship to them, right? So relatedness and spirituality, I would argue, and I think other cultural nationalists would argue, is central to what we should be doing in terms of thinking our way out of this mess that we're in. So can Africans speak for themselves? And so lastly, and just really briefly, killing Marx would really entail the courageous and important work of thinking beyond the terms that have been set by white people, that have been set by Karl Marx, especially. And the idea that we we have to choose between capitalism and communism, and if we don't make that choice, then we're somehow out of the loop. And I say I say that's just foolish, right? That Africans are fully capable of solving our problems if we take the courageous step of deep study of African culture, of African languages. And Brother Cambone has been really good with this language part. Frankly, I've been kind of lazy about it. I should be fluent in Tree, I'm not. But language will be key. Being able to communicate in Kiswahili, in Wolof, in Mandinka, right, would be really essential to understanding or thinking our way out of this mess, right? And so basically, I'm arguing that we've come up short, in that the way forward has to be thinking about these problems, analyzing these problems, and thinking about the way forward from an African perspective. Now, our brothers in the AAPRP, Kwame Nkrumah, Kwame Ture, they've pointed us in the right direction. For example, they've acknowledged that African religions, African spirituality is essential to who we are as humans, but they haven't made that the foundation of their analysis. And so that's what I'm suggesting is the way forward, and why we have to kill Marx going forward as an African people. And I'll end there, and I'll be happy to have a discussion about anything you guys want to bring up or add to the conversation. Hotep. Are there any questions? Any thoughts, contributions, criticisms? I welcome those too. Oh, you're welcome, Sister Tierney. My best friend, my homie from Ghana, we go back to 1997 at the University of Ghana. His last name is also Pepra. So I'm gonna appreciate that name. I wonder if they're related, actually, but I don't think so, because I know all his siblings. But it's a great name. Okay. Yeah. Glad you made it. Late is you're on African time, and that's how we do things. No problem. And there's a lot going on too, so I totally understand that. But I guess I could, let's see. There's a group of Haitians in Cuba, and they brought their religious practices with them. Yeah, very true. Yeah, in fact, wherever Africans went, they brought that's how they made sense of this mess, right? So when Africans were transported across the Atlantic, they didn't arrive here with a blank slate, right? They used their cultural knowledge to try to make sense of this new and horrific thing that they had been entrapped in. And so they brought their spiritual system, they brought their understanding of plants and medicine, understandings of intimacy, understandings of food. All those things were brought to bear on these new conditions, whether they were in Cuba or the United States or Suriname, wherever they were. They did exactly what you're saying. They brought those ideas with them. Let's see. Well, you could Google that, actually. Just search online. I don't know of a text specifically. This is something I've known for a while. I don't remember. I can't cite the text offhand, but if you email me, I could look through my notes and give you some sources for that. But I do know for certain that Dessalines, Christophe, and Toussaint all banned voodoo when they rose to power. I'll type up my Gmail. Shabazz@gmail.com. Yeah, and banned, I imagine, because they saw it as a rival to their power, right? And when people get into power, even people that we admire, there's a tendency to want to maintain power. Once you get power, the idea is, well, how do I keep it? And that's a human trait. And they saw voodoo as a rival to their authority, and the leaders of the Hugon, the leader of the voodoo priest, as a threat to their authority, so they banned it. and that's a common occurrence. And so it goes back to my point about, it really emphasizes my point about how um, African culture has been policed, has been banned, and then people wonder, well, why we have all these Marxists and all these um, other ideas about the way forward, but we haven't heard much about from the cultural nationalist perspective. And the idea again is that those ideas, even amongst revolutionaries, were extremely repressed. Yeah, I don't know if James mentioned it, that it could be true. I think that's right, but I wouldn't. I'd have to verify that. Please give examples of African spiritual cultural principles, practices that assist us in evolving. I think we have to think that through to collectively. I would say the one I emphasize here is the idea that of Ubuntu. Um, I am because we are, that our humanness, our identity, is fundamentally tied to who we are connected to, right? And that's how Africans have understood. That's a common occurrence throughout, at least from what I've studied. In East Africa, I've seen similar themes. West Africa, I'm not sure about North Africa, but certainly West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, you have similar ideas about um, the individual. It's not that Africa didn't have an idea of the individual. Individualism is part of our nature too. For example, I have a 5-year-old daughter, and she wants to show that she can do things independently, right? And that's common with humans. We want to show our independence, that we can do things on our own. But as a society, as a cultural norm, Africans tended to foreground the collective and put the individual to the background, right? So it's not that they didn't have an idea of the individual, but the collective of the communal was foregrounded. And I think that's really foundational for any sort of analyses and working through, the whatever condition that we face currently. Now, it's true that the Marxists, for example, say that we have socialism, and socialism is about sort of collective ownership of the wealth and the equal distribution of the wealth. But it's still, I think the problem there still is the focus on scientific, the idea that this is scientific, and the point there being is that human behavior cannot be programmed in that way. It's not a universal thing. Humans are unpredictable. We go left when you say right. You can't put human behavior in the scientific box and get good results, right? And so we have to, I think narrowly about what Africans have done, and not frame it as a universal science, but as a cultural artifact that, as Malana Karenga says, we take the best of those traditions going forward, but it's not a science in the sense it's not a universal. These aren't universal practices. And I think that's where some of our brothers and sisters get bogged down in the framing our politics as a scientific thing that's universal to all peoples. It's not. Africans have had a unique way of dealing with the environment, of dealing with social problems, of dealing with politics, of dealing with governance, and we have to draw up on those things, I think, going forward. Let's see. Spiritual cultural practice. So that's the main idea. So I'll leave it there. And again, I'm not an expert on these questions. I'm just suggesting a starting point. And again, I say, because I've been lazy with the languages, I'm already compromised, right? I can't speak an African language fluently, and I think that's really important to what we do. So Obadele has really done a good job with that, and others too. Well, let me qualify that too. I think it's also true that Africans in the Americas, in Nigeria, for example, we've also used English in imaginative ways, in creative ways, in cultural ways, right? So we reinvigorated English with an African African cultural influence, right? So that there's that. But I still argue that we still have to be fluent in African languages to do this, to get this thing right. Let's see. I'm asking this question to preempting a certain mentality. There are many who believe that if you're not Marxist, you must be capitalist. So do we need to be? Oh yeah, you missed that earlier. I made that point earlier. I stressed that you're right, that people that many of us believe that we have to choose between Marxists and the capitalists. And I'm arguing that really what that choice has done is really retarded our thinking. We haven't been able to think out of that box creatively about the way forward, right? So the language we use, Marxism, mode of production, materialist, socialism, all those things have retarded our effort to think creatively about our condition and how we might draw upon African examples, African cultural examples, to think, to analyze our problem and move forward. So yes, I agree with you 100% that we shouldn't be choosing between Marxists and capitalists. We should be imagining something beyond, something African-centered beyond Marxist and capitalist. Can you guys, it'd be great if you guys could come in and do I have to unmute your mic or can you just talk yourself? Because I'd love to hear from you. But I don't mind reading your comments in the box either. That's fine too. But I don't know. Let's see. Is there a way to? Yeah, I'm not sure. All right. Great talk. Thinking too much of how African anthems should be changed. Oh yeah, I agree. All of it. Yeah, we have to. And there's a brother in Ghana, a musicologist who he died in his 90s, who did a great. I've forgotten his name. I'm blanking on his name. But he's done a wonderful job of making sure those traditions are alive and they don't go away, right? So yeah, I agree with you that we so much of what we do, whether it's our political system, the parliamentarian system that we have of governance, it all reproduces these European models. Even Nkrumah, inexplicably, he didn't really seem to see a problem with reproducing the political structures that are basically European. Now, it's true that the Ghanaian system has some, there's some traditional elements to it, but they're sort of superficial. But first and foremost, I would say that the Ghanaian system and African systems all over Africa, the systems of governance are really Eurocentric. And so we have to think through all that, whether it's a national anthem or political system or educational systems, obviously are very Eurocentric. We have a lot of work to do, right? And that work is necessary, it's possible, and it's revolutionary, right? Contrary to what our brothers and sisters say, who are Marxists, the real revolution is excavating our traditions, our cultural practices, and rethinking, reevaluating, reassessing how we do politics, how we do economics. Do we even need an anthem? I don't know if we need an anthem or not. I don't know. We have songs, so songs are very important in what we do. Do we need an anthem? I don't know. But all those things need to be reassessed from an African-centered perspective. We haven't really done that work yet. And so it's necessary work. Let's see. When Evelyn says, when Africans have a range of beliefs, practices regarding spirituality and religion. Yes, it's a good question. So you have all these traditions, right? And how do you integrate them? And I'm suggesting that, yes, we, as Karenga suggested, that we take the best of those traditions, and then it becomes, well, who decides what the best? I don't know. But I think we have to, as a people, figure out how we can best integrate those systems into something that's useful and practical in the ways forward. And perhaps to the diaspora, maybe that's part of the solution, right? So what we've done as a matter of necessity, right? Voodoo in Haiti, or Santeria, Regla de Ocha in Cuba, or Candomblé in Brazil, or Shango in Trinidad, all those are combinations of various elements of Congo, of Ifa, right? And so that some of that work, we have a roadmap for doing some of that already. It's already there. It's in place. But yes, I would suggest, I think we have to figure out a way to integrate those things into something that's dynamic and inclusive and practical. So yes, I agree. It's a good point. Let's see. Something definitely had a president of Cuba right at the time of Fidel's death. Yeah, but it's true. But Fidel banned Santeria and even apologized for banning it later on. But he definitely banned and regulated um, Santeria. Discussions of race was also heavily policed under the Castro regime in some instances, because they were making this argument that we're all just Cubans, right? Anything else would be a challenge to that. And so Fidel policed the practitioners of Santeria. This is a fact. So we have to deal with that and figure out, we have to challenge that sort of thinking. And to Fidel's credit, he later, towards at a later period, apologized for that sort of repression, but it did occur. Let's see, Tafadizwa, let's see, is saying that, would you argue that conscientism takes improvement theory beyond what he's able to implement in his time in terms of implementing? Well, that's a good question. I think that conscientism, and I haven't looked at it in many years. It's a good effort of trying to bring together these different elements, but he already is, the assumption is already there that we have to figure out a way of combining. There's the conclusion, if I recall correctly, that Christianity and Islam are also part of the African tradition, and I think that's a mistake, right? I think a truly conscious African analysis or theory has to be derived from African culture that is not Islamic, it's not Christian. Those aren't African traditions. People have made the case that they are, but they're not. And so I think that the limitations of conscientism and Nkrumah's framing of religion and the role of religion, part of it is that he presumes that Islam and Christianity are not a part of our traditions, and I think that's just wrong. I'm not saying we can't respect. We should respect our brothers and sisters who are Christians and our brothers and sisters who are Muslims. They're always going to be there. Christianity is not going anywhere. Islam is not going anywhere. But I'm saying, as African people, right, that we have to have an African analysis. In Islam, you don't rely upon the pre-Islamic Arab culture. Islam is Islam, right? Christianity is, even though the various branches of Islam and Christianity, the foundation is that thing itself. And so it makes no sense for Africans to say, well, we're going to take our thing and then bring in Christianity and Islam. It doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, Jadi, that wasn't my suggestion. That was someone else who mentioned about national liberation songs. But it's a good suggestion. As I said before, we have to think through all that and redo it if necessary. Let's see. Anything else? I think I've covered everything that you all have asked. I don't know how long we're supposed to go, but I can, I'll hang out if you guys have more questions. I'm cool with that. How y'all doing generally? Has the program been good so far? Learning any new things? What's the way forward? What should we be doing as African people? Whenever Africans gather to discuss our liberation, it's a good day. I agree. Yeah, I'm always in good company where you have fellow Africans who are trying to think through this problem and think us out of this mess, and how do we, how do we move forward? That's always a good day for me too. In fact, I'm going to Ghana soon. I'm looking forward to that. We're doing a trip to Ghana in September, so I'm excited to get back to the continent. I was there last summer, and I'm looking forward to getting back and breaking bread with some of the brothers and sisters there who are engaged in radical struggle. So yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Okay, yeah. Oh, brother Shakara. Okay, I saw your different names, and I missed the Shakara. Okay, yeah, yeah. We hung out for a minute, didn't we? Good to see you again, brother. We were running in the rain and trying to get shea butter. We had a good time. Hope to see you there in Ghana again. Well, in fact, it would be great to meet you on terms. We're all relocated to Africa, um, and doing things in Africa for our people. So I look forward to that day for myself, and I hope a lot of us will make that decision too, to continue to work in Africa. Oh yeah, Shaka Ra's a beast, man. He's a bad brother. Definitely check him out on Twitter and YouTube. Yo, Nyami Ase. Okay, I think we can. I don't see any more questions. I think we can. I guess I can just close it out. If there are any more final questions, um, I'm going to make some moves, and I'm sure you guys are going to make some moves too. So, peace out. And like I said, if you guys have questions, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to dialogue with you about the way forward out of this mess. And Africans must unite. Take care. Peace.